let's talk about collection views in iOS. So I got a treat for everyone. I was prepping this lecture for General Assembly class in Swift, and I developed this really amazing PowerPoint presentation, and I thought I'd share it with you guys. So this screencast is going to be a little bit different. We're going to go through this PowerPoint, and then we're going to jump into code. So let's get started with collection views. Now, here's the what and the why. What is a collection view? Well, a collection view is essentially a way for you to display a ordered set of data in a very customizable layout. And the most common way you display that data is in a grid-like manner. So you run into collection views all the time in many of the apps you use. An example would be the Photos app. So this is the old school Photos app in iPad. And you see this grid-like representation of your photos, right? This is a very good indication that we're using a collection view. Another app that uses the collection view is Pinterest, right? With their waterfall, with their layout of data. And another app might be Instagram, right? So whenever you see essentially a grid-like manner of these cells and these views, you're going to run into essentially a collection view. Now, the closest relative to a collection view is a table view. And as we discussed before, a table view is essentially a one-column collection view, right? It's essentially one column and it's a list of items. An example of table views is your Mails app, where you have a list of mails, and your Settings app, where you have a list of options for your settings. So, but in this talk, we're going to be talking about collection views. So that's the what. And today we're going to explore the use case of collection views and how to display them in a grid-like manner and how to implement that. Now, the why. So a pro tip to everyone, always ask why you're using a particular technology. Don't just use it because your coworkers are using it, right? Whenever you're adopting a particular technology, know that your time is valuable. And to learn and adopt and implement a new technology, you need to spend a lot of time reading the documentation, tweaking your code, running it multiple times, getting it right. So your time is incredibly valuable. Always ask why you're going to use something. Does it make your workflow easier? Are you trying to use it to accomplish a certain set of requirements? So that's the pro tip of the day. And why would you want to use collection views? Well, you want to use it whenever you want to display a grid-like representation of your data. And collection views are much more highly customizable than displaying a grid representation of data, and we're going to explore that a little bit later on. Alright, so this is the big picture, and these are the major players when it comes to building and implementing your collection view. First off, you have the UICollectionView, which is a class, and that is the container for your entire collection view. And every single cell of the collection view, every single element in the collection view is a UICollectionViewCell. And this is a class as well, and it basically is a view that displays the cell. And right here you have two protocols. One is the UICollectionViewDataSource, which powers the content of the cells, and then you have the UICollectionViewDelegate, which responds to events that happens, such as when a user taps on a particular cell, when the user selects the cell, deselects the cell. These events get sent to the UICollectionViewDelegate. And on your right hand side is two classes as well. One of them is a UICollectionViewLayout, and the other one is a UICollectionViewFlowLayout. Now, these are essentially both concerned with the layout of the collection view. As I mentioned before, the most common way to display a UI collection view is in a grid-like manner, and that is implemented by the UI collection view flow layouts, which this is a class written by Apple, and it's the default layout when it comes to collection view. Essentially, a UI collection view flow layout is a grid, and a UI collection view layout is just a generic layout. And if you want to make your own collection view representation of data, you can implement a subclass of UICollectionViewLayout. Now, this is really meant to be a very high-level understanding, and we're going to dive into this one by one, piece by piece, and then we're going to jump into the code. So the purpose of showing you this is that this is the big picture, and these are the major players you need to be concerned with when building your collection view. So moving on. So here's your UI collection view, and the typical way beginners are shown like what does a collection view look like is this essentially this Photos app, this old school Photos app in iOS. And let's break down piece by piece and see how a UI collection view is formed. So we start off with the cells, right? And the cells are basically the content of the collection view. They're the meat of the collection view. So every cell in here is a photo. And moving on, the next type of view we get in the collection view, these are called supplementary views. And they're essentially information that aren't part of the cells. They're not part of the meat of the content. They're not the photos, but they should still lie somewhere in the collection views. Such as, these are supplementary views because they are not the centerpiece, but they add supplementary information. And examples of supplementary views include the header view and the footer view. So these are views that belong in the collection view, but they're not the meat of the content. Then you have the decoration view, and that's essentially the background view of the UI collection view. So right here, the frame is the background view. Now, I hope that makes sense putting it all together. These are very straightforward, right? You have the collection view, which is essentially your container. So it's essentially this invisible container that holds everything. And then you have your cells, which are the photos. You have your supplementary views, which is this Paris and this other city tag, this view tag thingy. And then you have your decoration view, which is your background view. And this is another way to show you what I mean by that. So pause the video if you want, let it sink in a little bit, and the different components, the different views you have when powering a collection view. Now let's talk about two protocols, particularly two delegates of the UI collection view. The first delegate you have is the UI collection view data source. Now the data source, as the name implies, provides content. It's the data that powers the collection view. So you can see this as being a relationship between the UI collection view and the UI collection view data source, where the UI collection view asks the UI collection view data source, particular questions, and the data source replies to the UI collection view with certain answers. Now, this relationship, if you guys have seen the video on UICollectionViewCells, very, very closely related to that. And I think it's part of Apple's intention to make them very similar so that you can actually learn them really easily and adopt collection views very quickly once you master table views. So basically, the collection view asks the data source, how many items are in section 0, and the data source replies, let me think, 4. And the collection view asks the data source, what should I display in section 0, item 4? The data source does some sort of processing and it returns, okay, display the cell. Okay, so think of this as a dialogue between the collection view and its data source. And the data source is responsible for providing answers to the questions that are specified in the protocol of the UI collection view data source. So now let's actually look into the code a little bit more. These are the main methods you have to be concerned with. There's only 3 of them. So essentially, the UI collection view asks the data source, how many sections are there? And it asks the data source, how many items in a given section? And then the third question asks the data source is, what's the cell for a given index path? And it returns the cell. And again, I just want to reiterate that this really, really closely resembles UI table view data source protocol. And it's meant to be like that. Cool. So the next delegate is the UICollectionViewDelegate, and similar to the UI table view delegate, this class is responsible for receiving events from the UI collection view. So again, this would be a one-way dialogue where the UI collection view talks to the delegate. So the UI collection view tells the delegate, hey, the user selected section 0, item 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if I tap on that, the delegate would get that event, and the delegate basically acknowledges it and says, thanks for letting me know. Now I'm going to do whatever I want with that information. Maybe I'll make the cell larger. Maybe I'll make the cell disappear. Maybe I'll highlight the cell. Maybe I'll change the tint color of the cell. Right? Doesn't matter. It's up to the delegate to decide what it wants to do with the event that has happened. And another event that might happen is the UI collection view tells the delegate, hey, the user deselected the cell in section 0, item 2. And the delegate tells, it doesn't respond with anything, but basically it acknowledges it and it does some sort of processing with that event. So UI collection view delegate is all about interacting with content. And that was a visual representation of things that are going on, and this is the more code base, what's actually going on. If you look at the documentation for the UICollectionViewDelegate protocol, you're going to see a lot more methods. These are two very specific methods on when the collection view, when the user did select item at a particular index path, or when the user deselect a particular item at index path. These methods would be called, and these are the two common ones that I've used. So the collection view itself has no idea how its cells should be laid out. The responsibility of the collection view layout is, the responsibility should be given to the UI collection view layout. How the cells are particularly laid out, how the sections are laid out, this class determines it. And Apple has written a class, a subclass of UI collection view layout. You can actually implement UI collection view layout. It's essentially meant to be an abstract class. So the UI collection view flow layout is meant to be a concrete class that gives you a grid-like representation. So this Photos app uses the UI collection view flow layout, and in many cases you're going to want to use in most cases, if you want to display a grid-like representation of your data, such as Photos app or Instagram, you're going to want to use the UI collection view flow layout. And if you use the UI collection view flow layout, the collection view is going to ask it, questions like what's the minimum spacing between cells, and then you respond with 5 points. And the collection view might ask it, the UI collection view flow layout, what's the padding on the particular section, and then it's going to reply 20 points. Now to look at more properties and see more in depth, what are the properties you can change on the collection view flow layout? You can change the scroll direction. That's an example. So it can be either horizontal, where you scroll the content horizontally, or it can be vertical, where you scroll the content vertically. Next two properties are the minimum inter-item spacing, which is basically the minimum spacing horizontally between cells, and you have the minimum line spacing, which is the minimum vertical spacing between cells. And notice that there's a difference between the minimum interspacing and the actual inter-item spacing during runtime. By specifying 5.0 between these two cells, I'm saying these two cells have to be at least 5 points apart. But at runtime, they can be 10 points. And even if they're 10 points, they still respect the rule. I don't think you can set a maximum. You can only set a minimum inter-item spacing. Another property that the collection view flow layout has control over is the section inset, which is essentially the padding of any given section. And to create a section inset, you basically initialize UI edge inset by calling this method UI edge inset make, and then the first parameter is the top padding, the second parameter is the left padding, the third parameter is the bottom padding, and the fourth parameter is the right padding. So this is an example of a section, and this is the inset that's provided with it. Cool. So this is just to reiterate, to give you a bigger picture. These are the four main properties you should be concerned with when dealing with the UI collection view flow layout. And again, this flow layout gives us a grid-like representation of our cells out of the box, and it's written by Apple. And you can determine the scroll direction, whether you want it horizontal or vertical. You can determine how much spacing should be between cells horizontally. You can determine the inset, how much padding should be given to a particular section. You can determine the line spacing, what's the vertical spacing between cells. So these are the 4 main properties. Obviously, there's a lot more. You can consult the documentation for that. And you can go really crazy with a UI collection view layout. So what we've talked about right before is a UI collection view flow layout. It's a specific layout meant for grid-like representation. But a UI collection view layout can have multiple subclasses. And you can have really complex layouts. You can have this layout where you squish all the cells together, right? Maybe every single one of these is a section, and the first cell is the one that's on top of the stack. And you can change it into everything into one section, and all the cells are in a circular manner, or you can go crazy with it, right? So the idea of having a UI collection view layout is that people can write different subclasses that can have different, very dramatic layouts, and that's really cool. So most people don't know this. When they think of a UI collection view, they think, or collection views in general, they think, okay, it's only limited to a grid representation. Well, it's not. If you understand the concept that the UI collection view layout is responsible for the layout of the collection view, and you can write different layouts, complex layouts, this is the power that you have in your hands. And there's a lot of third-party libraries that take advantage of that, and they essentially write their own subclass for UI collection view layout. So you can get things like the Pinterest collection view, which the cells aren't perfectly aligned. Some have taller heights, some have shorter heights, and whatnot. So this is really cool. I just thought I'd share that. Now altogether, I hope that makes a little bit more sense to everyone. So UI collection view, we didn't talk about it much, and that's because it only acts as a container for everything else. The cells itself powers up the individual cell views, so this would be like the photos. The data source would power, the data of the collection view, so what image gets populated into which cells. The UICollectionViewDelegate deals with events, so whenever a user selects or deselects a cell, the UICollectionViewDelegate gets notified. The UICollectionViewLayout and FlowLayout, we covered that extensively. Essentially, a UI collection view is a more generic class, which you can subclass to create your own layout. You can bring your own layout, or you can use Apple's generic UI collection view flow layout, which I've used in many cases whenever I want to display a grid representation of my data. So that's the big picture. These are all the major players, and let's do a demo. Cool. So I'm going to open up Xcode, go to New, Project, Single View Application. Let's call this Main Collection View Project, because I probably have one name example already. Oh no, I don't. Okay, well, that's fine. I'm gonna make this full screen, and the first thing I'm gonna do is look at my storyboard, delete this view controller file because I don't need it. Cool. So I'm here in my storyboard file, and there's 2 ways you can go about building your collection views in storyboard. So let's see here. I'm going to go to my attributes inspector, make this simulated matrix iPhone 4.7. Let's do iPhone 4 so I can see it better. So there's 2 ways you can go about building your collection view in storyboard. So I'm gonna go down to here to my library panel, and I'm gonna type in collection view, and it's gonna filter. It's gonna find me all the objects that matches this name. So the first thing I can do is drag and drop a collection view controller. And let's see here. I'm gonna make the simulated metrics. There's probably a way to set this as the default. And so I can just drag and drop a collection view controller and it's done, right? If you go to this drawer right here, you look at the view hierarchy, that's the collection view, right? The collection view is already embedded in here. It's the main view. or I can drag a collection view object into a UI view controller. Then I would have to do a little bit more work to get this thing going. And I'm very tempted to use it, but I'm not going to use it. I'm just going to leave it here. If I do plan to use it, if we have a little bit more time, maybe we can go into that. And the reason why you would go with a UI view controller with a collection view instead of a UI collection view controller is that notice this top hierarchy, this hierarchy of views. You have your main view, and then you have, so for the UI view controller, you have your main view, and then you have your collection view. And check this out. You can actually add your subviews. You can add other views here. So let's say I want to add a text field or something, right? Text field here. So I can add other views to this main view, and it would simply be, they would be simply siblings of the collection view. But in my collection view, I can't add other views here. The collection view is the main view, so there's no way for me to add other views. So having this collection view as a child of this main parent view makes it more flexible because you can add other views as well. So whenever you want a collection view down here and maybe like a button or a label or a text in the same view controller in the same screen, you're going to want to implement a UI view controller and then drag a collection view in there. Now if you do that, just really quick, you want to click on this, and this will show you all the outlets connections. So you want to actually drag the data source and the delegate to be the view controller. Now if you go to this collection view controller and you look at the outlets are already set for you. Cool, so we're going to go with this from here on. Let's get that out of the way. We want to make sure this is the initial view controller, so when we start the app, this is the view controller that is loaded at first. So all I did was I went to Attributes Inspector and I clicked on is initial view controller. Cool, so this is basically it. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to create a new file, Command N, and I'm going to create a CocoaTouch class, and I'm going to name this main, and I'm going to want to make it a subclass of UI collection view controller. And notice that the auto completion is handled for me. All I have to deal with is the first part of the name, and the second part of the name is dealt for me. It's auto completed for me based on what I subclass from. Cool. So I'm going to hit next, and I'm going to create that file. And notice by the virtue of creating a subclass of UI collection view controller, I have these bunch of pre-written codes and boilerplate codes, which is really nice. If you don't have this boilerplate code, it's likely that you didn't inherit subclass from a UI collection view controller. It's likely that you subclassed from a UI view controller. So go back again, remake that file, make sure that you subclass from a UI collection view controller. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to delete everything in, well, I might keep this. So I'm going to delete this method because I don't need it. I'm going to delete that method because I don't need it. So right here in this section is our UICollectionViewDataSource. So we discussed this, right? Essentially, the data source is responsible for returning a set of answers to the questions asked by the collection view. So so the first question we're going to answer is how many sections should there be in this collection view? Well, simple. We're going to make this 1. The second question it asks is how many items is in a particular section. And let's make this 400 items. The third question it asks us is what's the cell for item at index path. So an example would be what's the cell for item at section 0, item number 330, right? And then we have to return a cell. And here this is essentially dequeuing the cell. So we're dequeuing the cell and we are typecasting it as a UICollectionViewCell. And what we're going to do is change the background color to be a random color. So cell.background color equals to, we're going to initialize a UI color object. And for red, so this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to explain it. Maybe I should explain it right now. So if you know a little bit about coloring, you know that the possible values for red, green, and blue each goes from 0 to 255. There's 256 different colors from it. And you would imagine that you would put, you know, if I want this to be all red, you would imagine I'll put 255, 0, 0, and alpha is 1.0. So alpha is basically opacity. It's whether or not something is opaque or not. If something is opaque, then you put 1.0. If the color you want is transparent, you want it to be 0. And anywhere between is between 0 and 1. So you would think that if the possible values of any given color, red, green, and blue, is from 0 to 255, and I want them all to be red, I would basically fill out the maximum value for red and have 0 for green and 0 for blue. Well, it turns out that the parameters accept a number from 0 to 1, not 0 to 255. So in order to normalize it from 0 to 255 to 0 to 1, we essentially divide the value that we're going to pass it divided by 255.0. So this would turn out to be 1. This would turn out to be 0. And this would turn out to be 0. Okay, so I hope that makes sense so far. Basically, this is going to a little lecture about color. Essentially, the possible ranges for red, green, and blue is 0 to 255. You can read a little bit more about that. And we need to pass a value. We need to normalize it. We need to convert that. So let me write that here. We need to convert 0 to 255 to 1. Convert or normalize. And we do that by dividing by 255. Now, we want this to be a little bit better. We want every single cell to have a random background color. And the way we deal with randomness is using the arc4random uniform function. Basically, if I pass it like a number such as 50, then it's going to return me back a number from 0 to 50. It's going to return me back an integer, an unsigned integer. Specifically, if you hover over it by hitting Option and you hit on this, you can see that this is a function declared in the standard lib, and it returns back specifically an unsigned integer 32. And just another nugget of wisdom, I guess, for you guys. An integer can be positive or negative. An unsigned integer, also known as a uint, is positive only. And I think 32 stands for 32-bit, which is essentially the range that is available for the given integer. Okay, so this gives us a value from 0 to 50, right? But we want it to give us a value from 0 to 255, so we do 255. Every single parameter takes a CG float, so we need to initialize this as a CG float. Remember, CG stands for core graphics. So that's all we need to do, and we actually need to have this random number in red, green, and blue, so we can mix them all up. Now this looks a little verbose and cumbersome, but I think you guys get what's going on here, right? We're setting the cell's background color, creating a new UI color object, and we're having a random green, random red, and a random blue, and alpha 1, and we're returning a cell. So let's see if there's anything else I'm missing here. I need to go to the storyboard. I need to click on the view controller. I need to click on the identity inspector, and I need to make sure that the classes are in sync. So I need to make sure that this is a main collection view controller class. Next, copy your reuse identifier, which is in this case a cell. Go back to your main storyboard, click on the cell, make sure the cell is selected, click on the attributes inspector, and then make sure the reuse identifier is the cell. Now this whole concept of reuse identifier, and if we go back here, DQ reusable cell with identifier, this whole concept of DQing cells is basically used for table views and collection views mostly, and it's for memory management. You can read more about it. The concept of DQing objects and reusing objects from a reuse pool is used in many different scenarios, from video game development to iOS development to Android development, and you can read more about it later. But for now, the purpose, we're not going to talk about DQing cells. Focus on collection views. So after you get that reuse identifier and you make sure that the cell's reuse identifier is set, click Command R to run, and you should be able to see something like this. Right, that is awesome right there. That is so cool. I mean, I think it's cool. So what we have here is essentially a collection view, right? This whole thing is a collection view. Every single one of these is a UICollectionViewCell, and the data source, right? We've implemented the data source. If you go to the storyboard, we implemented this data source, which tells us, hey, there should be one section, there should be 400 items, and this is the cell that you're going to return. And this is the only thing that we made that's, that's kind of unique. We essentially give it a random color, a random red, a random green, and a random blue. What would be crazy is if we give it random alpha. Maybe you can try that at home by giving it random alpha. We didn't implement the UICollectionViewDelegate. We can do it right here. Let's see if we have the method. Should select item. Let's see. So let's actually implement the method. Let's check it out. Let's see how it works. So we have collection view, and there is a ton of methods here. We want did select item at index path, and let's just print to the console. Let's do something simple. Did select item at index path, and let's print out index path dot row. Let's run it again. So I just wanted to quickly implement a delegate method to show you that, hey, when events happens in the collection view, this delegate method should be called. So click on that. Notice that it did select item at index path 27, 14, 2. You can do all sorts of funky things with this. Maybe you want to change the color of a particular cell when a user taps on it. Maybe you want to make it grow or shrink. Up to you. You're the delegate. You get to decide what you want here. Cool. So let's actually delete the code we don't need. So we're not going to use this. All this comment. And if you look at it, this is relatively short piece of code, right? This is like what? All right, so let's look at this from line 13 to line 58. This is basically 50, 60 lines of code, right? 55 lines of code. Wait, 15 to 30, 58. That's actually 45 lines of code. That's 45 lines of code. And to implement something like this, like, wow, that is nice. So let's go to the main storyboard here. We talked about all the other players. The flow layout is very important, right? Remember, the flow layout controls things such as how the views are laid out, how the cells are laid out. So let's actually change the scroll direction. So I clicked on the collection view flow layout object, and I clicked on the attributes inspector. So if you click on your collection view really fast, you notice that there's this drop down for layout, and you can have your own custom layout where you plug in here, hitting custom, and then you have your own class, or you can use the flow one. By default, the standard layout is the UICollectionViewFlowLayout. Again, written by Apple, and its purpose is to essentially give you a grid-like representation of your cells. So let's see, I clicked on the flow layout and I set the scroll direction. Let me set it to, let me set the collection view, let me set the scroll direction to horizontal, Command R to rerun it again, see how that goes. And there you go, I'm scrolling horizontally instead of vertically. So you can launch this in the App Store, make it scroll forever. You know, I'm actually very curious. I'm gonna do it in this demo right now. Let's do 4,000. Because we're using the concept of dequeuing, it's probably not going to be slow at all. Oh, this is so cool. It's so cool. All right, so we can actually play around with properties of the flow layout, and the best way to learn something is to play around with it and to see what things you can change. So let's go to collection view. Let's click on the ruler. And notice that you can change a bunch of properties, such as the cell size. So let's make this 100 by 30. And that's 100 by 30. And let's make the minimum spacing 5 by 5. Section insets 20 by 20 by 20 by 20. So remember, the section insets is the padding of a particular section. The cell size is basically the width and the height of the cell. The minimum spacing is the spacing between cells horizontally, and 4 lines is the spacing between cells vertically. And let's Command R to run this and see how much of a dramatic effect it has, right? That's pretty crazy. So we have our section. So if we go back here, we have our section insets. You see that there's top spacing, there's bottom spacing. As agreed upon, the cell width is 100 and the cell height is 30. The minimum spacing between cells has been reduced to 5. So play around with this, get a feel for it. I'm gonna change this back to my default. And I think the default, let's actually make it 150 by 150. Or let's say 110. And let's change this by 0, by 0, by 0, by 0. Cool. So let's do custom collection views cells really quick. Up to now, our cells are basically very simple cells. They've just changed their background color. Nothing special about it. But we're gonna make our own cell now. We're gonna essentially put an image on the cell. Now, if I go to my library panel and clicked on image view, let's make this full screen. And I'm going to drag this image view over here. I'm going to use auto layout to make sure that this image view is pinned against the 4 corners of the cell. Now, to make a custom UI collection view cell, I need to make a custom UI collection view class that corresponds to it. So I made my custom cell here visually. Now I need to make the class. So I hit Command N, and I'm going to subclass a Cocoa Touch class, and I'm going to call this main, for a lack of a better name. So I want this to be a subclass of UI collection view cell. And again, notice that the auto completion handles it for me in the top, so I don't have to do more writing. I'm going to click Next, and I'll click Create. I'm going to open this because I want both the storyboard file to be open as well as the Swift file to be open. I'm going to use the assistant editor here in the top right. Show the assistant editor. I'm going to drag main.storyboard, or well, I clicked main.storyboard and it's on top right now. So I'm going to drag main collection view cell into this toolbar, and bam, the storyboard's up top, the main collection view cell class is in the bottom. So what I want to do next is drag this as an IB outlet into the main collection view cell class. So I'm going to hit Control and I'm going to drag it over here, and it doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? Does anyone know? Pause the video if you think you can find an answer to it. So what's missing is I need to click on my cell, click on Identity Inspector, and make sure that the cell, the UI view, is in sync with the class definition. If not, it's not going to be able to drag the outlet. So I'm basically telling interface builder, hey, this is not a UICollectionViewCell. This is a main CollectionViewCell class. I hit enter, and then now I should be able to control drag this. I'll name this main image view. Cool. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to import a bunch of images. We're going to import them locally. Okay, so basically I have a bunch of images that I have of company logos. I'm going to command select them all, and I'm going to drag them into the image assets folder. Whenever you have GIFs, whenever you have TIFFs or PNGs or BMPs or PNGs, kind of rhyme. Whenever you have these image assets, you want to put them into images.xc assets, because this is essentially, this folder is made for you to put your image assets in. It's meant to centralize the storage of images and assets. So I'm going to hit Command B to make sure this builds. I think there's one file I might need to delete here, but we'll see. Oh, maybe it works. Cool. So now I have a list of company images and in my XC image assets, and I'm going to go back to my main view controller, make this full screen. I'm going to comment out registered cell classes in my ViewDataLoad method because I am no longer using UICollectionViewCell. I'm using my own custom cell. I'm going to go down here, and instead of creating this as a background color, I'm going to first typecast this to be a main collection view cell because I'm not dealing with a UI collection view cell anymore. I have my own custom cell. I'm going to call cell.main image view. I'm going to set the image to be a UI image, and it needs a particular name. So how do we get the name? The name is basically going to be let image name equal to the index path dot row modulo 70 to 70 plus 1. Put that inside of the string interpolation. So this would give me back 1.jpg all the way to 71.jpg. Right. So check on the modulo operator. This is basically giving me the remainder based on a division between these two operands. And because there's a possibility it can be 0, I'm going to add 1 to it because in my XC image assets I don't have 0.jpg. So for this exercise, you obviously don't have this folder with these images, so find basically a list of images, make sure they're the same file extensions, and put them into images.xc assets. So here I'm just getting the image name, and then here I'm creating the image itself, and if everything goes right, should be it. Okay, one more thing that I forgot to do. I need to go to storyboard, go to my image view, click on the attributes inspector, make sure it is aspect fit, and make sure my cell's background color is white. So click on the cell, click on attributes inspector, make sure its background is white. So that should be good right now. I have a white cell with an image view that uses auto layout and has a custom class. And now if I run it, I should see the image logos. Cool. So there you go. So every single one of these is a custom cell. That's about it. You can imagine adding more things to this, such as labels, buttons, go crazy with it, and that is about it. So in this screencast, we talked about collection views, why use it, how they're implemented, the different players, which includes the collection view, the UICollectionViewCell, the UICollectionViewLayout, the delegate, and the data source. We've implemented it on here with relatively few lines of code. We're able to make this funky background, random background color. We also explained how RGB works, how the process of normalization works. We've explained how to create a custom UI collection view cell by creating that custom UI collection view cell class. And then in our data source method, essentially change the typecast and then set the image like this. We've also implemented one UICollectionViewDelegate method just to get us going and see how the events are responded. So I really hope this gives you a much clearer picture on UI collection views and collection views in general. They're incredibly powerful, and you can imagine that once you change the layout, crazy things can happen. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching and have a great day.